Okay, so starting off today, we're going to talk about pasture poultry laying hens. Once again, I've had hens, pastured hens before. I don't have them now. I quit doing that, and I'll tell you why. I specialized in the decided to specialize in the broiler market. I have so many good growers that I work with that have do a really good job with laying hens that we kind of got into the barter system, and I trade them broilers for eggs. But they're really good producers, and I'm glad to have access to the products that they are producing. So let's talk a little more about this side of it. There's a lot of interest out there in the public in terms of accessing eggs from pastured hens. Various reasons why. We won't go over the demand side of it a lot, but what I want to talk to you about is kind of what the growers tell me. Layers are relatively easy to birds to learn from. If you're new to livestock, poultry is a great way to get started in it. You'll learn a lot of the basics for all livestock species, and poultry are pretty forgiving, and layers even more so. Obviously, the product is out there because there's a consumer demand for those local fresh eggs. You don't have a huge investment in any of the poultry enterprises. You can spend as much or as little basically as you want to do to get into the enterprise. So you can get in with very little capital into the poultry production. And another thing is, it's good for product diversification. People that are selling eggs, even broilers. There's not a lot of broilers that are fed in the winter because of extremes. And the weather, but it's good for product diversification. Anytime that you can keep as a small farm producer a product in front of your clients, that's a good thing. So instead of just kind of losing the contact with those clients and getting products to them at the end of the season, even if you're doing season extension work, if you have poultry products, like eggs and broilers and things like that, it's good to stay in front of the consumer. So other things that they say. Profit margins are very tight. Just like any other small farm production, you're producing a product that you have to differentiate from others in the market. There's ample opportunity for any of the communities that you live in to go and buy, a dozen eggs for, $2 or a little over $2. That's not the type of market that you're going to be competing for or within. With raising these, because you can't lose money, produce these types of products and lose money. So profit margins are very tight. Hens do eat a lot of feed. They put a lot of nutrients into the production of eggs and maintaining their body, so they do eat a lot of feed. Feed costs are very high. Labor is significantly higher than raising broilers. Broilers are kind of it's a pretty straightforward labor-wise. I mean, you have access to them, a couple of times a day, but you don't have to do that much really, especially if you're in a kind of an automated, your pasture system has become a little automated. But you're going to have other labor expenses with having laying hens, and so that you have to get paid for your labor. It's fun doing these small farm enterprises is fun, but you have to be able to make money while you're doing it. Pick the right breed for the job. Just in poultry, as in cattle and hogs, sheep, goats, everyone thinks the breed that they raise is the best breed to have. I won't spend a lot of time getting into what's best or what have you. What I want to get across to everybody is basically you want to make sure of a couple of things. And one of them is, if you're going to get in a colored egg market, you've got to have a certain breeds. You're going to use certain breeds, and versus just the white eggs. The other thing about that is you want to make sure that you're using, breeds that are specifically known as being good egg layers. A common mistake for a very new grower getting into raising pastured layers is that they will take some of their broilers that they've been raising and take the broiler pullets and think that they're going to have them be their layers. And that's exactly what you don't want to do, because you're using a meat breed should be used for meat production, and a layer should be used for laying eggs. So this screen here just kind of gives you some examples of some of the types of breeds that we might use, the varieties that we might use for different types of production of eggs. Just make sure that you're using the right breed for the job. Okay. Now, an example here is, for instance, the black sex-linked pullet. So let's get some terminology done here. The pullet is basically the young female that hasn't started laying. She's the one that we're growing up to a certain point in physiology and age and what have you, so that she can start laying eggs for you. So crossbreeding, by crossbreeding two different breeds together, you end up getting what's called hybrid vigor, and what that is that the offspring of that mating, for instance here the Rhode Island Red and Barred Plymouth Rock, you get a crossbred bird that is very, very productive and will do really well for you in terms of what you're wanting to do. So by crossing these two good, laying type breeds, you can get a hybrid that's a really good layer. Okay, and I haven't raised the black sex-link, but I think the reason they're called that is the blacks on the black sex-link, the males they're black. Both of them are black, but one has a dot, I think, of white on their head, which makes them distinguishable later on. So that's an example of crossbreeding, and you as a commercial producer of eggs really want to take advantage of that you're crossing the two layer type breeds to take advantage of that hybrid vigor. Okay. Okay, the other thing that I just mentioned briefly was, depending on the market you want. I have growers that I work with that sell nothing but brown eggs. They don't have a white egg layer on the farm, and the reason for that is they have a specific market that wants the brown eggs. For instance, one grower I have sells strictly to, all the eggs go to a local restaurant, and they want nothing but brown eggs. So that's what they're producing. And another grower that I work with that I learn every time I talk to him, I learn something every day. Tells me whatever you raise on a small farm, you want to raise what you can sell. So if you can sell brown eggs, get hens that will lay brown eggs, white eggs for the other customers. Okay. Okay, let's get into some of the specifics here. On housing, this is going to be really varied across the board too. There's not really a standard way to do this, just like there's no standard small farm operation out there. So, but there are some things that you want to keep, always make sure that you maintain. And one of those is to allow, a certain square feet, 1.5 to 2 square feet floor space per adult chicken. Any livestock on small farms, if you crowd them, productivity goes down, disease incidence goes up, stress goes up. It's just not a good thing. So make sure you're allowing, between the minimum of 1.5 to 2 square feet of floor space per adult. Most of the layer systems that you will find on small farms utilize a day range approach, and basically what that is they have some way of locking those hens up, those layers up in the evening for protection. They have a facility where the eggs have, nest boxes where they're going to be able to collect the eggs, and then the birds are let out during the day so that they can access, the range. Some other terminology, you'll hear free range, and that is basically the birds can go anywhere they want, anytime. Most of the growers that I work that have layers are using a day range system so that they can have more control over what pasture the birds have access to and safety. It's a little more safe in terms of predators getting the birds and what have you. A lot of growers I work with use chicken tractors. That's what I use on my farm, and when I had the layers also, the chicken tractors. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll have a picture here in a minute, but basically it's a structure that the birds stay in all day, all the time. They're not released from that, but you move it to fresh pasture every day. So every day they get access to clean, fresh pasture. It's covered so that, they're not out in the elements, but they get sunlight and all of the very positive things that you get from a free-range system. But it's extremely varied. You can have everything across the board. So figure out what works best for you. Some of these systems might not work because you have a really high predator presence, on your farm. So you may have to do something where they're confined. Other places you might not have any. Don't be discouraged too if when you start you change the type of system that you have, because that's something that happens quite often too. And that's okay, because you'll eventually morph into the system that works best for you. So some more on the mobile housing. This is basically just kind of an example. I think it's a really neat example of a structure, an egg mobile. And you've probably seen these online before. If you looked at 10 of them, you'd find 10 different versions of these. What I think is really neat about this one is, especially for laying hens, we'll talk a little later on about how important light is for laying hens, but you can see in this system they've got clear polycarbonate panels on this. So instead of most of the structure being covered with a tarp or something like that, they're able to access as much light as they possibly can. So for instance, if there's a day that you don't necessarily let the birds out to free range, you're still getting a lot of that solar radiation and that light in there for those hens, which is really critical. But I think that's a really neat a picture there of an egg mobile, and apparently the way I understood it when I found this picture was it's one of the research trials that they're doing at North Carolina State, which is really big into poultry. Here's some other examples of ones. Like I said, there's no one standard. The picture on the right, you can see that's a pretty popular model, and what they do is that's basically where the hens get in locked up every night. That's where they have their nest boxes, and you can see it's on an old trailer with an axle underneath it, and you just pull it around the pasture wherever you need to go, so that they always have fresh, clean pasture. The one on your left is one that would be used as basically on a skid. So they'll move it, appropriately, however often they feel that they need to, so that they don't overuse the pasture. Same thing on the bottom one on the right. That's a very large one, and it's just a matter of size. It's the same idea as the other two on the page here, but it's just a matter of scale. This is a neat picture. University of Florida does a lot of work in pastured poultry and small poultry systems, and this is actually the system. Here's a good example on facilities and what have you. This is the same system that I use on my farm for broilers, and the pens that I used to use for layers, all I had to do was take the nest boxes out of those, and so I didn't have any more investment in facilities versus one or the other. But what's neat about this system is these are just made out of cattle panels. You might have seen them before, and they're on skids so they can be moved to fresh pasture. There is a series of nest boxes on the ends of these, and that's just a really slick system. That's one you're going to be able to build that type of a system for your layers for just probably a little over $100, less than $120. And another neat thing about this in terms of labor is, you can see on the bottom right, is you access all of the nest boxes from the outside, so you don't have to spend a lot of time going in and getting into the nest boxes. So I thought that was a really neat system that they're doing in Florida. Okay, so we're going to switch from facilities to a little bit talking about chicks and pullets here. And remember, if you're new to this, the pullets are what they're the younger females that aren't laying yet, and we want to get them into the laying flock. And how do we manage those? So the thing you want to remember here is that your pullets, you want them to grow very, very well all up until and continue to grow even once they start laying. But you want to make sure that you put body condition on, they're growing healthy, they're getting enough calcium, what have you, up through laying, so that they can go right into the laying flock and be very, very productive. You will never get a pullet that comes in that is a smaller bird, hasn't grown well. She's never going to catch up, especially when she starts laying. She's going to start laying very late, and then she's not going to be as productive in her lifetime as if she came into the laying flock, healthy and thriving. Okay. And the second point there is just what I was talking about. A small bird will lay small eggs, and so you know it's a losing venture from all the way around if your pullets are too small when they're coming into the laying flock. I'll step back here a little bit too. Pay specific attention to the breed, the variety of pullet that you have, because you know mature weights will vary. So you want to check. You know, you can't compare one to the other. It has to be variety breed specific. And once they start laying eggs, you know, you can't make up any of that time. So we have to manage accordingly early on. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about nutrition in a little bit, but here's one thing that I want to talk about is introducing pullets, you know, to nesting. We're going to jump around a little bit, but we'll just cover these slide by slide. So the pullets are 16 to 18 weeks of age. When they're 16 to 18 weeks of age, you need to start introducing nest boxes, you know, and make sure that you add, you know, the straw, wood shavings, whatever you're going to add to the bottom of these. And the reason you're doing that is you want them, you know, they're going to be very close to starting to lay at this point, and you want to get them used to going in the nest boxes, become comfortable with them, and so by the time they're ready to start laying, they're going to start laying in those boxes. So by about week 20, what most producers do with the new pullets is put a couple of fake, they're usually glass eggs in there to help train them to, you know, go in there, and they'll know that that's where, you know, it's almost like they're learning from the older ladies in the coop there. And well, this is where we lay our eggs. Okay. Next slide. Pullets and hens are different. What I want to get across here is that, you know, you have basically, you know, kind of a chick pullet on the left-hand side. She's still growing. You know, she's taking a lot of the energy that she's taking all the energy she consumes every day into storing calcium in her bones, you know, increasing her muscle mass through the protein and fat, and feathers, you know, take a lot of minerals and nutrients to put on feathers. So she's got a lot going on, and she needs to be fed, you know, according to the label directions of the feed that you're using to get her to grow. So on the flip side of that, we get the laying hens. They're in full laying mode. You know, hopefully we've got them to a point with our management where they're healthy and thriving. You know, they have good body reserves of what they need to go into that and maintain their own health, but maintain their productivities as layers, and can be layers for you quickly and consistently and for a long time. But they are different. Don't try and grow a pullet on a hen layer feed. There's not enough protein in it for her to be reared correctly. Just make sure that you're feeding according to the label directions on your feed tags. We'll talk a little more about that in a little bit also. Let's take a real quick look at the egg production cycle, and I often get asked, you know, how long will these birds, you know, continue to lay, and how long should I keep them? But basically, what we see, you know, at just a little over 20 weeks, you know, we'll start seeing these pullets will start laying. They're very productive, you know, early in their life, and from the get-go, that productivity starts to decline a little bit, you know, as it goes along. Now, there's a point of diminishing returns on chickens, you know, and a lot of the large commercial flocks, chickens aren't kept very long at all, before they're replaced. It might be a little different on the small farm because you don't have a lot of birds, and you might want to keep your birds longer. But another fast fact for you to remember too about this is that these pullets, they're basically all the eggs they're ever going to lay, they have in them already. So there's a finite number of eggs that they're going to lay over their lifetime, whether, you know, that lifetime consists of a 40-week life, or if they're kept out there a long time. But you'll have to get used to on your farm with your breed and your management system and feeding system, what have you. You'll start to get a pretty good idea about how long you should be keeping your layers in there. Okay. Here's another example, just to look at this graph here. So as we look at the years of lay, you know, you can just see over time. Year one here is the index year. So if we're at 100% of her capacity, laying capacity of that first year that she's laying, it starts to drop off and drops off pretty significantly after that first year. But like I said, you have to decide for your own farm how long, when is that point of diminishing return where she's not she's not either laying enough or bringing in enough net profit to the farm that she needs to go and be replaced, and what are the costs of your replacements and what have you. But it does decrease every year, and there is a point there where those birds aren't even making back their feed. So that's why detailed records are really important. So how long will they lay? Like I said, they're hatched with the total number of ova, which are the eggs that they'll ever have. They can lay for a long, long time, as you saw in that graph that we just looked like. You can have a 5, 6, 7-year-old hen. She will still lay, but it's not going to be consistent. The eggs are going to be of poor quality, and she's not going to be making back her feed costs. Okay, and the other thing about it too on these breeds, remember what I talked about earlier, where you have these breeds that are known for laying and being very productive layers. The higher that rate of production in the first year or two, which is what you want. You want them laying a lot of eggs early when they're young. The fewer years she's likely to lay eggs later on, because like I said, she's already got, there's only a certain amount of ova in there that she can lay. So if she's really highly productive for you during the first year or two, she may have just did her work early on for you, and you've got to consider bringing in some more pullets. Okay, let's talk a little bit here. I alluded to some nutrition things, and let's talk a little more about this. So let's take an egg, for instance. I already gave you the answer to my question, but look at the composition of the egg white and the yolk here, and why this is really important to know is that nutrition for laying hens, for any livestock on any farm, is important. But we're talking about laying hens today, and basically what we're talking about is energy, protein, water, vitamins, and minerals. And you can see in an egg white and an egg yolk, there's a lot of water in there, so they have to have a lot of water, which is actually a nutrient. We consider a nutrient in animal husbandry. A lot of protein in the egg, a lot of fat. You can see in the egg yolk, 32% fat. That's why some of us with high cholesterol are told not to maybe eat so many of the egg yolks. And there are minerals that come out of that. My point with this is that you have a product. You're wanting this producer, this laying producer, to give you good quality, consistent eggs, and you can't starve your way to good production, because there's a lot. We're asking a lot of these animals, to maintain their own health and vigor and what have you, and then produce this high quality product. So you can't starve your way to profits whatsoever. That's a very important point to know. So some more on nutrition. Let's talk a little bit here. So an egg type hen will consume about 85 to 90 pounds of feed per year. So when you're budgeting, that's kind of where you want to start out with. Different size breeds will vary, but that's what you can start with for your budgeting purposes. The next two, basically what I want to get across to you, and this is from personal experience, professional experience working with growers, and I've got a degree also, my undergrad's in animal nutrition. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. I oftentimes get calls about these far out ingredients, that people want to know about, that they've read online, that is really good to put in this. Nutrition is very straightforward. As long as you've got a standard kind of ration that covers all of vitamins, mineral, protein, energy, as long as you're providing that, you don't need to get complicated with all these other things. Now, what's really great about where we live, especially in Illinois, I know we have some people from different parts of the country on, but in Illinois, we've got these really high quality feedstuffs, in terms of corn and soybeans. And the other thing that I ask new growers to think very carefully about is, when you're talking about nutrition, you have to ask yourself if you have the time, interest, and expertise into doing a lot with ingredients on your farm. And if you don't, what you need to do is be buying a complete mixed ration, which has basically got all of the nutrients in there. You open the bag and feed it according to label directions. You can buy what's called a supplement. And what you do with a supplement, it has the proteins, vitamins, and minerals in there, and you add the energy source, which 95% of the time will be corn. So you would add an appropriate amount of corn to the supplement, and that would give you your complete mixed ration. But like I said, you need to make sure that, take a good look at, if you have the time, interest, and expertise, because you can, especially with layers, it's important with everything, but especially layers, you can really mess up their nutrition if you try to get carried away with some of these things. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. So what should be in the ration? This is a slide I also use for the broilers. We're specifically talking about layers, so you want to mix these rations according to the label directions, and you'll see on the labels, if you're growing pullets, if you have chicks or you're growing pullets or you have layers, how you're supposed to mix that up and what you're supposed to be supplementing with them. Breed, basically what that has to do with is the amount of feed you'll feed per day. Obviously, no-brainer, the bigger breeds will eat more than the smaller breeds. And some of the other things, you take in consideration, or some of these other things. A lot of that has to do with broilers. So these nutrients that we have in here, like I said, the nutrients are basically, energy, protein, protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. So when we have to satisfy a lot of different things in these hens. And what I mean by maintenance is there's a base level of nutrients that they have to consume each day just to maintain themselves, to maintain, feather quality and bone health and muscle maintenance and what have you. So that's called maintenance. And above those, you have growth and production. So in a broiler situation, you'd have, however much it takes to gain X number of ounces per day. In a layer setup, you would have, okay, above the maintenance to staying alive, we want her to produce an egg every day, for an X period of time. So we have to take that in consideration. Stick very closely to the label directions on your feed sources, and you should be fine. Basically, what you're looking at is on the laying hens, about 16 to 17% protein is going to be the, kind of an average what you would find based on your breed and the product that you're using, the feed supplement that you're using. Feed it according to label directions. Flip that label over and it'll tell you exactly how that manufacturer, if mixed according to label directions, how that should be mixed and fed based on what you're using. Carbohydrates are basically the energy portion of that diet, and in a typical layer, a mash, which a mash is basically, it's kind of a ground formulation of the complete feed that you would feed every day. Okay, and it's best to feed it as a mash because you get the ration mixed up together, so every time they take a bite, it's a complete total mixed ration that they're getting, so that's a mash. In I would say 100% of the, I said 95 earlier, I've talked myself into 100% of the diets around here would have corn, yellow dent corn, which we have in abundance here as their source of carbohydrates. Which is, we're very, very fortunate, especially in the livestock industry here in Illinois. Protein, basically, that supplement that you're going to buy, the protein in that's going to be soybeans, might be roasted soybeans, 48% protein soybeans, and most every ration for laying hens will contain fish meal as another protein source because of the amino acid profile. So you have different amino acids in amino acids make up proteins, so you have different amino acids in the soybeans and the fish meal. So I would venture if you went out today and looked at any of your poultry supplement tags, you would find fish meal in there, high quality food ingredient. Fats are used in different situations to increase the energy content of the diet. You won't lean hen diets because you're not trying to put a lot of weight gain and things like that. You don't want to get them too fat, so you won't see fats in the diet. Vitamins, the ones we're interested in are fat soluble and water soluble, and A, D, and K are the fat soluble and the water soluble you can see there. Another nice thing about these, the supplements that you can buy. All of this has been pre-weighed, pre-measured. They have so many international units of these vitamins, you know, that a laying hen needs in there. So if you feed it according to label directions, you should be good with the vitamins. Same thing on the minerals. I won't spend a lot of time here. Those minerals are going to be in the supplements. One thing, though, you can see oyster shell at the bottom. When your hens are laying, you want to give them free choice oyster shell all the time. It's full of calcium. If the birds, you know, want some extra calcium, they'll eat that. They'll kind of gravitate towards it themselves. Just let them have free choice access to it, and they'll regulate themselves. Don't short them on calcium in the diet, but have that available for them to peck out and get extra calcium. So most of the time, free choice oyster shell, you know, that keeps the shell strong. If you have weak shells, usually that's an indication of them not getting enough calcium in the diet. That's one indication. They'll also start to become less thrifty because if they can't get calcium in the diet, they'll start pulling it out of their body, their bones and feathers and things like that. So it's just it's cheap. You know, just give them free access to that all the time. Okay, here's another question that I get a lot is on scratch grains. And for those that are new to this, basically what we're talking about are those grains that producers go out there and throw out for hens, broilers even, to scratch at. And really, you don't need to be feeding scratch grains, because if you start to feed these scratch grains, basically what they are, you can see cracked corn, barley, oats, things like that. All that's doing is just giving the hen something to scratch at and peck at. And if they scratch at a piece of cracked corn, when they eat that piece of cracked corn, all they're getting is just the nutrients in that cracked corn, okay? Whereas if you're feeding this mash, every time, remember what I said, every time that they take a bite, they're getting a complete, total mixed ration. They're getting the protein, the vitamins, the mineral, everything in proportion to what they need in that one morsel of food. Well, if you feed scratch grains to them, what you're doing is you're starting to dilute that mash that you're feeding them. So you might think you're feeding a 16 or 17% crude protein mash to your birds, but if you're feeding them scratch grains every day, you're diluting that, and you may only be feeding a 10% ration to a laying hen, and her productivity is going to go down, egg quality is going to go down. So, you know, there's a rule of thumb here, you know, just feed them. If it makes really, why you're feeding scratch grains is just for you to kind of feel better that the hen is out there doing, you know, what hens do. But you don't need to feed scratch grains, okay? And then with the chickens, it's best, general rule of thumb is, you know, make sure you supply grit to them. They don't need grit, you know, with a mash type feed, but they're going to be out there pecking around other things, and especially if you decide you're going to feed some scratch grains, you've got to have the grit out there for them. Some common feeding mistakes. Don't feed table scraps to the birds. There's various food safety issues with those that can become a problem, and a lot of times when you feed table scraps, you invite predators, possums, skunks, weasels, and things like that, stray cats, and it's not a good deal. That other one, the second part is, you know, basically what I'm trying to say there is don't feed the scratch grains. You need to be feeding a complete mixed ration there, okay? So you don't want to mix your complete commercial feed with the scratch grain even, you know, and throw it out, because you'll still be diluting that complete mixed ration, okay? Blending those types of things is just what I said. It'll cause problem because the protein and energy content will go down. And if your nutrition is off on these birds, once again, you know, you'll see feather pecking. They might peck at each other, eat their own feathers. Eggshells will suffer, and you can tell just by the general thriftiness of the birds that you have a nutrition issue. I hope I'm answering your questions for you as we go along here, but we'll get to some more in a minute. Okay, let's talk about the pasture side of pastured layers. A common misconception is that raising birds on pasture, that pasture takes the place of different feedstuffs in that chicken's diet, whether it's a broiler or a layer. And pastures actually, what they're going to get out of that is they're going to get a little more protein if it's a certain type of pasture, a young succulent, type of a clover or something like that, and they're going to eat insects, so they're going to get some protein there. They're going to get very little energy, okay, because chickens aren't ruminants. They can't take, grass and like a cow would and turn it and produce with it. So it's only going to supplement them, and by supplementing, there's all sorts of percentages that come out, but it's going to be well under 5% of what they consume in a day is going to be that pasture. So you have to feed a complete mixed ration to these layers, even when they are on pasture. And the way to do that, you think about that is, okay, I'm going to feed them the complete mixed ration, so they're getting everything that they need when I feed them every day or twice a day. And then anything they get insect-wise, weed seeds, things like that, that's just kind of icing on the cake, so to speak, pardon the pun. Different forages will provide different nutrients, so if you have, a poor quality, pasture that they're on, don't expect to get much out of that whatsoever, versus an alfalfa or clover or something like that. And the last comment here is, like we talked about a little bit, really take time and think about if you have the interest or expertise. I think you'll find your management time is better well spent on other things other than getting real complicated into the feed stuff side of it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. Management again. Light is very important to laying hens. And let's take some time and discuss this a little bit. So let's look at the pullets. They're basically, we're growing them to get them into the production side of it. So if they're the opposite of the hens. You don't want pullets getting a bunch of artificial light too early, because it will stimulate them to develop before they're ready to. And then if that happens, then their productivity is going to be lower later on. Okay, so with pullets, other than natural light, and as we go through, a 6-month period, the natural increase or decrease in natural light, that's all that they're going to need. Okay, if you feel like you have to give some supplemental light other than what's you provide for heat, we'll talk about that in a little bit. You shouldn't be doing anything like that until they reach 16 weeks of age. Okay, or 2 pounds. So the pullets are different than the hens. You don't want a bunch of artificial light for them. Let's just touch, for instance, here on this light required for heat. I often get asked, and here in Illinois, and I think across the country this week, we experienced the lowest temperatures we've had in 25 years. I often get asked the question, do the hens need supplemental heat in the winter? And the answer to that is basically no, they don't, if you're keeping them in a place where there's no draft. Their nutrition is good. They have access to free choice thawed water, and you're really diligent about keeping the draft off of them. They don't need supplemental heat. They'll do fine. They actually do better in cold weather than they do hot weather. And if you add heat through heat lamps and things like that, you can actually kind of back yourself into a corner and create some more problems with some pneumonia and things like that. Okay, so the flip side of that is on the hen side. The hens need a lot of light, okay? So you can see, and I'll show you in a table here kind of when this happens, but anything below 12 hours of daylight will cause her reproductive cycle to shut down, okay? So in a typical year, when will we see that? I'll show you in this next slide. So what that does is, based on daylight, that'll trigger her to stop laying eggs, until spring, when that natural day length that she's looking for increases to sufficient levels again, okay? So if you're wanting to keep her laying, then, artificial light needs to be applied. So when do you do that? When the day length approaches 13 hours, okay? Which in our area is about September. Now, I have growers that let them stop laying in the winter. I have others, that keep them laying. That's kind of a management thing. You need to think about how you're going to handle that. But remember, if they're not laying, they're not paying their way. So what we have here is out of Champaign, Illinois, and duration of daylight. So you can see here this 13 hours that we're talking about. in the previous slide of daylight. About September 1st, 2nd is when that starts to happen, okay? So with the hens, we may need to, if you're going to decide to give them supplemental heat and keep them laying, you're going to need to start doing that about September 1st. Now, the participants from other states need to check, you know, and see when that happens, find out when that 13 hours is. If anyone has a question, go ahead and type it in the chat box here, and we'll try and take care of it. Okay. So Lisa, why don't you go ahead and type that in, and you probably got a question that the whole group wants to know about too. We don't have a lot of time to spend on going over a lot of the light requirements for the lane side. I would like to do that because we could spend another hour doing that. Look at some of your extension, state extension publications that they have on managing flocks, light management for flocks. This is a good one out of Nebraska that I've used actually some data from, and it's a really good one for you to look at. But remember, you know, just remember that light is one of those things that in a lane flock versus the broilers, you're going to want to spend a lot of time managing. Okay, molt. Basically, what we're talking about with molt is when the hen ceases to lay, stops laying, and she basically loses her feathers. She's bringing in a new batch of feathers, and usually she'll lay, you know, anywhere, you know, about a year before she molts, and starts to lose those feathers, getting ready for another production cycle. A poor producing hen, you can see, will take 16 to 18 weeks to molt, and a high producer may only take 8 weeks, you know, to complete a molt. It just depends on the breed and the circumstances that you're raising these birds under, but it does take a little bit of time for them to replace those feathers from the time they start to the time they get done with that. And when they're molting, they're not laying too, so that's another consideration. If you're new to it and you start to see when molt starts, you might get nervous and not know what's going on. But basically, that is the hen is just replacing her feathers, you know, in a production cycle. And let's get to the question about heat lamps. Basically, with heat lamps, why you don't want to use them is the birds will get accustomed to staying in there in the heat, and typically you would have they can stay in there, and the humidity can get higher because they'll defecate in there and get moist, and then moist heat, you know, in this time of year in a confined space will lead to pneumonias, or to pneumonia, so you don't want to use that. And as long as you're keeping the draft off of them, you don't need the heat lamps on there. Okay, and on the lowest temperature you'd be comfortable with, well, that's hard to answer. It comes back to if there is no draft, if they're eating well, they have plenty of free access, you know, ice-free water. So you've got a heated water in there. They're eating well, and you have a facility that you have all of the drafts off of them. I don't have any growers that are using any heat lamps at all. So I'm not sure where you live. Maybe, you know, that might be different for, you know, in Minnesota, Canada, something like that. They may do differently, but in Illinois at least, if you satisfy those circumstances, you're going to be okay. They're going to handle the cold better than they will the heat. They'll also bunch up. You'll find that a lot of times they'll bunch up with heat lamps, and some of them get stepped on and killed, and that's an issue too. Okay, laying behavior. Okay, so a layer will produce an egg every 1 to 2 days. So you probably won't go out there every day and get an egg off of every single hen. Don't expect that. They'll start laying at about the pullets. So these are the ones that are coming into the laying flock at about 18 weeks of age. This is very typical, you know, with all breeds, that the first legs will be very small and they'll be on the floor for some reason. And I asked one of the poultry specialists that I am familiar with, I said, why is that? Why do they lay those on the floor? And there was no one has a real good answer for that. There's a lot of ideas about it, but that's just the way it is. That's reason why too that you can put the faux eggs, the false eggs, in the nest to kind of get them encouraged to go in the nest and lay those eggs. So on the lane and the light, as we discussed here in the two previous slides, make sure you have a program to manage the light for that lane flock, and make sure that's, you don't want a lot of lights for those growing pullets. You don't want them to start laying before they're physiologically mature to do that. And then after they lay, then you want, light is very important to them to keep them laying. So you want to increase that light. Let's talk a little bit about nest boxes. You want to have one nest box for 4 to 5 hens. A lot of times what I will see in smaller farm situations, we have one nest box for 1 to 3. We're not dealing with hundreds of hens at a time, so most producers like to have, plenty of nests out there and for them to lay in. Keep the nest boxes off of the floor for various reasons. The hens want to go up there, kind of a roosting type scenario, to lay their eggs. You want to have a front panel on there. The reason for that is you want to keep the nest material in there. You don't want eggs falling out, and then you don't want the hen to having any trouble getting in and out of that. In addition, when you put that front panel on. You can put a perch, on the front of the nest boxes. Most people do, and what that does is basically it kind of helps the hen get into a nest. I have a lot of growers tell me that, they have those on there, so if a nest already has an egg or two in there and a hen jumps up in there, she's less likely to destroy whatever's in that nest if there's a perch that she can jump up to. And the really neat nests that I've seen are these rollout nests on the bottom, and basically what you see there is the hens go in there and lay, and that the floor of that nest is on an incline, a very, very slight incline. So when the hen lays her eggs, those eggs roll out into that trough, and they're kept very clean. You can see just what's in a nest. There's no chance that they're really going to get stepped on, and those are really neat systems. I think the people that are using those are really happy with them. Okay. So here's an example of a really clean nest box. The majority of the time, people will either be using, pine shavings, wood shavings in there. It looks good. A lot of growers use straw. Those are the two main nest box materials you want to use. Of those two, you decide works best for you. The main thing is to just make sure that those nest boxes are clean. Your eggs will be cleaner, your hens will be cleaner, and it's a lot less work for you down the line. Let's spend a quick second here. We're kind of coming down the home stretch with this one on culling. And there comes a point with all of these birds in your laying flock when they're not laying, they're low producing, they're not even making back their feed costs, and there's an economic return that has been surpassed here where they're not paying their way. So how do you do that? Well, you will get to know. As a good animal husbandry person, you will get to know, what hens seem to be doing well, what ones you have trouble with, so you have the culling that goes on. The weak, crippled, or diseased birds, they need to be taken out of the laying flock. They're not producing, they're not productive, and they're not making you any money. And on the individual, okay, you pick the individuals and look them over. They might not be the ones that look weak, crippled, diseased, but how do they look overall? And this is very subjective, and the only way that you can get good at this is through experience. I mean, I can't, in my next few comments, I can't make you a professional at culling for producing laying hens. But what you want to look at is, do they have dull color, and on their comb, as all the pigment and color came out of around their eyes and their comb? Are their eyes sunken back in? Are they the pubic bones? Have they used all of their, have they used their body resources for egg laying? Are they in poor condition? Are their feathers in poor condition? As I said, the only way that you can really do this is by experience. And one thing I would encourage you to do, if you have any people that are good experienced growers around you that are growing or have layers, go talk to them and have them explain some of these things, that I'm talking about here, because the only way that you can really learn it is by seeing it. And you'll know it when you see it, but the first time it's kind of hard. But you need to take a good hard look at these birds and decide if they're paying their way or not. I'm going to catch up here on one question. If you don't supply supplemental light in winter, will they lay less eggs or not at all? Yeah, they'll quit laying. Basically, they'll quit laying if you don't provide that supplemental light. So you have to do that, and they can quit at all, quit growing at all. So good question. Good question. Let's talk about overwintering a little bit. We've mentioned several times, about supplemental heat and just want to reiterate, adequate shelter means devoid of drafts. You don't want them in shelters, that are so tight that there's no air movement whatsoever, but you want that to kind of be a natural air movement and not be one that, anything is blown in. So if you can keep the draft of direct winds off of them, they can withstand, really, really low temperatures. If their nutrition is good, they're eating, they've got that free choice, ice-free water, and access out of the elements, okay? And dry, that's the other thing, dry. They've got to be able to stay dry, have all those things and stay dry. In the winter, most growers will limit the access time they have outside the shelter, simply for those reasons. We don't have very hospitable conditions, but those birds will want to get back outside. Sunday and Monday here in Illinois, when we had, 14 below was our outside temperature, the birds probably didn't want to go outside at all. But as of like a day or so ago, I think it got up to like 16 plus, positive 16. Those birds will go outside. They want to get outside. They enjoy that. So they can withstand pretty cold temperatures. Exposure is the big thing. Frostbite is one. If you have birds that were exposed, for whatever reason, frostbite can become an issue, like in all livestock and humans. You'll see black tips on their combs. That'll indicate that there's been some frostbite, because their combs are very sensitive to temperature. So if they did have frostbite, you'll see that on the tips of the combs. And this is related to the question about the light. Egg production can be maintained if you have a photo period of 16 hours of total light per day. So depending on where you're at, figure out how much light you have per day, and then add that supplemental as appropriate. Remember, that's the supplemental light that's appropriate for your layer hen, not those pullets that you're growing to bring in the layer flock. Okay, real quickly on this so I get caught up. Roosters, you don't have to have roosters in the flocks for the hens to lay. They're going to lay anyway. The only reason you have to have roosters in the flocks is if you want to hatch your own eggs, and then you would need a rooster. Okay. The next few slides here are ones that we could spend, an hour on. One thing, I'm going to give you a resource here in a minute, but this slide, basically what I want to get across is a couple of main things on the eggs is cooling, cleaning, things like that. So with storage, no more than 45, degrees Fahrenheit. So you need to have some refrigerated storage for those eggs. All right. The eggs need to be clean that you're going to sell, and prevention is a key there. It's so much easier to prevent dirty eggs than it is to clean them, and that's done through managing your nest boxes. If you have dirty eggs, they should be washed in water that's at least 20 degrees warmer than the eggs. And the reason that you want to do that is basically you want to make sure that this egg with that warmer water will expand, and it will push things out of the eggs instead of pulling things into the eggs. So if there's anything bad on the egg is going to push it out instead of pulling it in. That's very important. And then after initial wash, you can use bleach to sanitize it, 1 tablespoon, to a gallon of hot water, followed by a rinse. Okay. And the next slide, just real quickly, the most familiar egg packaging is the pulp, cardboard pulp, holds 12 eggs, and then the eggs should be graded. And grading is grouping the eggs, into similar lots, similar characteristics. Most of the growers I work with, they have hens that are all of the same breed type, so their eggs are very consistent. There will be some differences in eggs from the young hens versus the older ones, but there's not a lot of variation in there. So, but what I want you to study, spend some time studying, is you can just Google this USDA egg grading manual, and there's a lot of, it's a pretty big document, but Google that and study it. It's a PDF document that you can look at, and it goes over how USDA determines their grades and how you grade eggs and how that whole thing works. So Google that document and you'll learn a lot more about that. In Illinois, and whatever state you're in, just look up your Department of Agriculture. Look up your state Department of Agriculture, and they'll go over the egg and egg product regulations that you have in there. This is an example of a PDF. If you just Google this too, Egg Product Act in Illinois, this is what's going to come up. And it talks about, you know, some of the different points of the Egg Grading Act and regulations and how you can sell eggs and what have you. So whatever state you're in, look up the State Department of Agriculture and they'll go over all of the regulations. We don't have time to get into it today, the regulatory side of it, but do a little bit of homework on that. And I'm going to get to questions here in a minute. Efficiencies. Basically with the laying hen, what we want to look at is, you know, how many pounds of feed per dozen eggs. And since feed cost is about 70% of your production, you know, that's one of the efficiencies that we really want to look at. And it will range, you know, from 4.2 to 5.6, as you can see in bullet number 3, per dozen of feed per dozen eggs. And that will vary a lot on management, and it'll vary a lot by breed, okay? But we would like to see somewhere around 250 eggs per year out of these birds. So that's a rule of thumb. Keep detailed records as you go along, you know, in your operation and figure out, you know, what your base benchmark is for these layers on your farm and see how you can improve some of those efficiencies, okay? And I want to thank Ken Kolkebeck is the extension specialist for poultry for the University of Illinois, and I work with him quite a bit on poultry items on the small farms team, so I appreciate his peer review of this presentation. Let's get back to some questions here. Use of basically hog and cattle blood and bone meal for protein. Any thoughts? You will find that the most of the protein that we're going to use in these rations are going to be fish meal and soybean based. You know, if the manufacturers that you're using are able to use some of these other byproducts, these animal byproducts, in a basically a cost-efficient manner, they'll do so. You know, they access those types of products are manufactured such that they can be rendered safe. You know, it's just going to depend on what your supplier that you're using is putting in their product. But you can feel pretty comfortable if you're buying from a reputable buyer, you know, that they've went through all of that and what they need in their mixes. Frostbite. We need to double check with a veterinarian on this one, and I would defer to them. But as I understand, frostbite can't be corrected once you know, the combs have been basically those cells, those tissues have been frozen. They can't be corrected. And probably what can happen is a number of things. That tissue will fall off. It could fall off and become infected. But I've never heard it. I think the idea, I've heard the Vaseline thing before on can it be prevented, a frostbite. I've heard that before. I've never had it proven right or wrong that it does work. I would like to know maybe if anybody has ever tried that with that, but I have heard that before. Beth, I buy eggs now, the state that states that they are Omega3 feed. Any comments on feed with this nutrient? The only comment that I have about the nutrient is you can supplement almost anything in your feeds. The major manufacturers, some of them, you know, have in terms of consumer demand and what have you, supplemented with things like this, you know, feeds that are high in omega-3 because it's a marketing thing. I can't speak towards the nutrition side of it in the egg itself that you're purchasing, you know, on your own, but there are a lot of manufacturers that you can get some supplements that you can add to the feed. A lot of the there are feed supplements that you can buy commercially that, you know, already have a supplemental, you know, X, Y, or Z in it. That's one of the ideas behind the pasture side of this is the claim, and it's being researched all over, that access to these poultry products that are on pasture, good quality, high quality pastures are higher in omega-3, the products. And there's a lot of research going on in that. Lisa says flax is one feed for increased omega-3. Okay, all right. Okay, got a question from Scott here. Is there anything specific a producer can do to gain an edge in the farmer market side with eggs? And actually, I'll try and answer that myself, but what I would like to do is we probably have some growers online here that have some ideas about selling eggs on the farmer's market side. Type a response in to Scott's question in the chat box there as I talk, and I'll give my 2 cents worth, but I'd like to hear from other growers. The biggest thing I think that a grower can do, wherever you're selling it, and Scott, you're talking about a farmer's market, is you've got to really work with the consumer to let them understand what the product is that you're selling. So for instance, I was teaching yesterday to a group, and we were actually talking about selling garlic, fresh market garlic. But the conversation was such that, well, okay, or let's say eggs. You know, if eggs can be bought for $2 a dozen, you know, at store X, Y, or Z, you know, that's going to those are different types of products than what you're selling off the farm, and the difference in those is, you know, you're selling specifically off a local farm. You know, you can sell what the value-added things are that you're doing, you know, with those eggs, and how the hens are, you know, produced, and how that product is produced. It's not an apples and oranges per se. An egg is not an egg is not an egg. So the things that you need to do, whether you're selling garlic or eggs and what have you, is you really need to differentiate how yours is different, you know, in that market that you're going to. Does that make sense? Okay. The last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in my email. That is my email. If you have, after you think about this for a little while, have some more questions, and be sure and send me an email. I'll be glad to help you out. If you remember, you can go back and watch the archive if you missed something, but certainly I'd be glad to talk to you. I love to talk with growers, especially new growers, to get ideas of what you're doing and how we might be able to help. So be sure and send me an email if there's anything that you need. That's a good, Fiona had a good idea on that question about farmers market. Invite them out to the farm to see, you know, how that product is produced. That's a great idea. And on commercial feed, doesn't necessarily hurt a business. No, absolutely not. You know, and simply because you don't need to become a feed specialist. And this, I'm saying this from experience working with new growers and getting them started. You don't need to become a feed specialist. To do so takes, you know, really a lot of training to do it right, and a lot of specific knowledge. So, you know, why not take advantage of some of the opportunities that you have in taking, you know, buying some of this expertise. So I don't have, you know, all of the growers that I have have buy some degree of a commercial feed. Some of the larger ones may be adding their own soybean meal and corn, but almost all of them are buying, well, all of them are buying a commercial feed to some degree. Most of them buy the supplement that you add to the corn. So corn and supplement equals your complete ration. Most are doing that. 9 out of 10 are doing that. April had a good point there too. Quality of life, you know, you can sell that also as kind of a selling point on your eggs too. They're basically need to separate fact from fiction on hormones and feeds, and basically you're not going to find those in the commercial feeds that you're purchasing. What you're going to find in those supplements that you go to your local feed cooperative or wherever you buy your feed, you're going to find in there that they just commercially mixed, you know, a fish meal, a soybean meal, a vitamin mineral packet, and then you're adding your corn to that. So that's pretty straightforward. You're not going to be finding feeds that have, you know, hormones added to them. They just don't do that. But just ask your feed supplier, you know, and or get a tag offline. You know, you can get a tag of any of the supplements that you might want to purchase and just see what the ingredients are. But they'll be glad to talk to you. Okay. looks like we got through the questions. Send me emails if you have any more. Good luck on your starting your laying hen operation. Wish you well to everybody, and keep in touch. And I know a lot of you are signed up for the rest of our webinar series for the rest of the season here, the other 9 sessions we're going to have. Really excited to have you on here, and it was a pleasure working with you today. So everybody have a great day.